Welcome, students. Today we are going to understand the part 3 of the freedom struggle of 1857 in history. In the last two parts, we have seen the causes of the revolt of 1857. There were political causes, social causes, economic causes, discontent among Indian sepoys, and immediate causes. Whole country was discontent of the way of the British rule, including the peasants and the sepoys. The interference of British in the customs and tradition of the India, interference in the economy of India led to the freedom struggle by the Indians, in which the British had to face many oppositions. The first rebel against the British was from Mangal Pandey in Barakpur in Bengal because of the smeared cartridges. After Mangal Pandey's death, the rebel rose from North India to South India. The sepoys in the Meerut took a major step by raising their voice against the British. They took up their arms against the British and went to Bahadur Shah, the Mughal emperor, in Delhi. Bahadur Shah accepted the leadership and proclaimed himself as the Emperor of India. They captured Delhi, and this increased self confidence of the sepoys. Many soldiers were revolted in cantonments in many parts of the country. There were many leaders who fought in their regions to save it from the British. There were fighters such as Rani Lakshmibai of Jhansi, Nana Sahib Peshwa, Tatya Tope, Maulvi Ahmad Allah, Kuwar Singh, Mughal commander Bakht Khan, Begum Hazrat Mahal. They all led the revolt in various regions. The revolts were very fierce in all the regions. The Indians wholeheartedly fought against the British, including soldiers, zamindars, kings, commanders, and common people. The Indian sepoys started the freedom struggle before the fixed time. Initially, they succeeded, but the revolts failed because of the military strength and administration of British rule was vast. Now, we will see how the revolt failed. Crushing of the struggle. Rani Lakshmibai, Kuwar Singh, Ahmadullah, they all led their lives in this revolt. After this revolt, the British made quick recovery within next 6 months. They regained the lost territories, even though the struggle began with discontent among Indian soldiers, but later the peasants, artisans, common people, tribes, they all came together to fight against the British. In this rebellion, Hindus, Muslims stood up with a great force. Their common aim was to overthrow the British from India. There was an inspiration of gaining independence behind the struggle, and therefore this freedom struggle gained a national form. After this revolt, Bahadur Shah was caught by British and he was imprisoned at Rangoon. Nana Sahib and Begum Hazrat Mahal took shelter in Nepal. Tatya Tope fought for next 10 months against the British, but due to betrayal he was caught and hanged to death. In this way, by the end of 1858, the British ruthlessly crushed down the struggle. Various causes of failure of the struggle were: the struggle was not comprehensive, there was lack of central leadership, most of the feudatory princes remained aloof, lack of military tactics, international situation favorable for Britishers. So now we will study these causes briefly in our next slide. The struggle was not comprehensive. Though the revolt was formidable and widespread, it was yet to a great extent localized, limited, and ill organized. The struggle did not take place simultaneously all over India. Its intensity was more severe in North India, but Rajputana, Punjab, some parts of Bengal, and northwest India remained aloof. Aloof means alone. The area affected was the Punjab, the United Provinces, Rohilkhand, Oudh, the territory between Narbada and the Chambal and the western parts of Bengal, and Bihar on the northeast India. in the South India of the river Narbada made no movement of importance, though the native regiments mutinied at Kolhapur in the southern Maratha country. And there was also many dangerous outbursts of feelings at Hyderabad, the Nizam's capital. Central and eastern Bengal were undisturbed, and Nepal rendered the British valuable assistance in putting down the revolt. Thus, the revolt was only local and not nationwide. The main problem, however, was lack of unity in the ranks of rebels themselves. Their leaders were suspicious and jealous of each other and often indulged in petty quarrels. The Begum of Awadh, for example, quarreled with Maulvi Ahmedullah and the Mughal princess with Sepoy generals Azimullah. The political advisor of the Nana Sahib asked him not to visit Delhi because he can be overshadowed by the Emperor Bahadur Shah. Thus, selfishness and narrow perspective of the leaders sapped the strength of the revolt and prevented its consolidation. Lack of central leadership. There was no commonly accepted leader to fight against the British. Due to this, there was no uniformity in the struggle against the British. The lack of leadership amongst the rebels was another very important cause which brought about the failure of the mutiny. The only capable leader of the mutineers were the Rani of Jhansi, Tatya Tope, and Nana Sahib. Indian leaders lacked organization and planning. The rebels were poorly organized. The uprisings in different parts of the country were uncoordinated. Often the sepoys behaved in an uncontrolled manner. The rebel leaders were no match for the British soldiers. Most of its leaders thought only of their own interest. They were motivated by narrow personal gains. They fought to liberate only their own territories. No national leader emerged to coordinate the movement and give it purpose and direction. The rebels were lacking in discipline and a central command, and they could not win against a powerful and determined enemy who planned its strategy skillfully. Most of the feudatory princes remained aloof. Feudatory means a person who holds land under the conditions of the feudal system. Here, the feudal system is of the British system. The ruling princes did not support the sepoys. On the other hand, they actively assisted the British in suppressing the revolt. Sir Dinkar Rao, the minister of Gwalior, Sir Salar Jung, the minister of Hyderabad, Jung Bahadur of Nepal, and Dost Muhammad, the ruler of Afghanistan, were indifferent to the revolt and actively helped the British against the sepoys. Lack of military tactics. The need of the time was a leader with military capability and political skill who could face the scattered elements into a consolidated force of great momentum with a definite policy and plan of action. Such a leader was hard to come. Bahadur Shah too was an old and exhausted man, lacked organizing ability. Nana Sahib, though possessed some ability, lacked military leadership. Other leaders such as Rani Lakshmibai, Kunwar Singh, and the Begum of Oudh were local leaders and lacked all India standing. Indian soldiers were brave but did not use tactics. They captured Delhi but could not retain it. Similarly, the Indian rebels had limited arms supply. The British had economic strength, disciplined army, enough stock of latest arms, and experienced army generals. Since transport and communication was in the hands of British, their movements were swift. Due to this, the Indian sepoys could not succeed. Wars are fought not only based on bravery but also through the military strategies and tactics. International situation favorable for Britishers. British had just won the Crimean War in Russia. Crimean War is war fought with arms and weapons. This enabled the British to send additional troops to India to put down the revolt. The Indian sepoys had few guns and muskets. They fought chiefly with swords and spears. On the other hand, the British soldiers were equipped with latest weapons. They had trade relations with different countries in the world. The naval strength of British was vast because of the trade relations. They used the telegraph and railways to their advantages. They could send messages about the revolt much in advance so that precautionary measures could be taken at the other end. Early beginning of the revolt, lack of unity, personal jealousies among the Indian sepoys came in the way of their success against the British. The British government called a huge force in India itself and received additional force from the Crimean province of Russia and crushed the rebellion completely within a year. Consequences of revolt of 1857. Due to the company rule, there was growing dissatisfaction among the Indians, and the British rule had to face the struggle of 1857. The revolt of 1857 marked a turning point in the history of India. It set a very big influence upon the British policy in India. The character of the Indian Empire in the last decades of 19th century was shaped to a large extent by the events of 1857. The considerable support which the revolt obtained and threat it posed to the very existence of British rule in India during the year 1857 forced the British to examine the entire nature of their connection with India. So therefore the British come up with some policies to change their rule. So the first one was transfer of power. The transfer of power from the East India Company to the Crown of England was achieved through the Act of the Better Government of India in 1858. Under this act, India would be governed directly by the Crown acting through a Secretary of the State. The Secretary of the State was made directly responsible to the British Parliament. To assist and advise the Secretary of the State in transacting the affairs of this country, a council known as Indian Council was created. The Indian Council was to consist of 15 members, of whom at least 9 should have served India for not less than 10 years. The Indian Council was to be presided over by the Secretary of the State. In India, the central administration continued to remain in the hands of the Governor General, who was designated as the Viceroy of India. Lord Canning, the last Governor General of India, was now the Viceroy of India, the first Viceroy of India. Then comes the Queen's Proclamation. Queen Victoria of England issued a royal proclamation on 1st November 1858 addressing the people of India. The proclamation reflected the generosity and religious tolerance. It pointed out that several benefits the people of India would enjoy and they would be treated at par with the subjects of the British Crown. The Queen's proclamation called upon all subjects within the British territories in India to be faithful and to owe true allegiance to British government. The princes in the princely states were assured that the territorial integrity of their respective states would be respected. All treaties and engagements made by the East India Company with them would be maintained. They were further assured that their rights, dignity, and honor would be respected, and the British government would not interfere in the internal affairs. The proclamation assured freedom of religion to the people of India. They would be allowed to follow their own religious beliefs, practices, and worship, and the British officials would not interfere in such matters. Equal and impartial protection of law was promised to all Indians. Further, the Queen's proclamation assured equal opportunity to the people of India in government services without distinction of race, caste, creed. The proclamation assured that while framing and administering law, due respect would be shown to the ancient Indian rights, usages, and customs. The British government would strive to achieve the welfare of the people of India. Finally, the proclamation announced the pardon to the Indians who had taken part in the revolt of 1857 against the British. Change in composition of army. British attitude towards the Indian army underwent drastic change. It was no longer possible for the British to assume that the Indian people would stand by the government in its hour of need. The British element in the Indian army was strengthened in order to ensure loyalty and efficiency. Thus, the number of Indian soldiers was drastically reduced from 2,38,000 to 1,40,000. The European soldiers was increased from 45,000 to 65,000. The proportion of Europeans to Indians was fixed at 50-50 in Bengal army and 1:2 ratio elsewhere. New recruits were drawn largely from these martial races of the Punjab, Nepal and northwestern frontier province who had proved their loyalty during the hours of urgency. English officers were placed at strategic locations. Artillery was kept exclusively in the hands of the British. Various groups were arranged to prevent any sentiment of national unity growing amongst them. There was division of military on basis of caste. Proper care was taken to avoid Indians to unite and rebel against the British. There was change in policy. So the British accepted the policy of non-interference in social and religious aspects of Indians. They also started taking care that the Indian society will not be united on social grounds. They saw to it that there will be constant conflicts on grounds of caste, religion, race, territory, etc. After the revolt of 1857, the British patronaged and applied the most polluting policy to divide the Indians in different castes and classes. They adopted the policy of polluting the minds of Indians by following divide and rule policy. The British used one class or caste against the other. The Muslims were made to fight with the Hindus, and the high caste Hindus were excited against the low caste Hindus. Thus, there was a deterioration in the whole country. Due to freedom struggle of 1857, the Indians felt of giving a united fight against the British rule. The freedom struggle of 1857 became an inspiration of Indian freedom movement. It took a national form. Now we will do the question and answers of this lesson. Question number 1. Rewrite the statements by choosing the appropriate options. After the struggle of 1857, the post of dash was created in the British government to look after the affairs of India. After the struggle of 1857, the post of Secretary of State was created in the British government to look after the affairs of India. Dash was the Governor General who annexed the princely states. Lord Dalhousie was the Governor General who annexed the princely states. Question number 2. Explain the following statements with reasons. First question is, the Indian sepoys could not keep stand in front of the British army. So the answer is, on May 11, 1857, Indian sepoys revolted against the British in Meerut over the use of cartridges greased with pig and cow fat. The sepoys attacked the British magazine to capture the weapon stores stocked there, but the sepoys could not withstand the British army. The reasons are, the first one is political reason. The higher class people like princes and educated class stayed away from the revolt. The revolt did not spread to a large area. The sepoy could not point out an alternative to current British rule. Second is military reason. The British Army was very small, well organized, and strong. The military supplies of the sepoys were limited. Organizational reasons: the sepoys were unorganized and unplanned, and very weak leadership. Leaders like Nana Sahib Tatya Tope were not efficient enough to confront the British Army. The revolt was undirected and did not have any motive. Second question is, after the struggle, Indian army was divided on the basis of caste. So the answer is, after 1857, there was a systematic reorganization of the army was done for the following reasons: to prevent the repetition of another revolt like that of 1857, to use the Indian army to defend the Indian territory of the empire from the other imperialist powers in the regions like Russia, Germany, etc. The rifles given to Indians were of an inferior quality till 1900. No Indians were allowed in the officer rank, and the highest rank an Indian could reach till 1914 was that of a Subedar. The Indian branch was reorganized on the basis of policy of balance and counterpoise and rule. The soldiers from Awadh, Bihar, central India who had participated in the revolt were stated to be non martial. Caste and communal companies were introduced in all the regiments to form a mixture of various socio-ethnic groups so as to balance each other. Communal caste tribal was made positive to check the growth of nationalist feelings among soldiers. Alert efforts were made to separate the soldiers from life. They were controlled through measures such as preventing newspapers, journals, nationalist publications from reaching them. On the whole, the British Indian Army stayed on a valuable military machine. The third question is, the British imposed heavy taxes on Indian industries. So the answer is, the reason behind the heavy taxes were the industries in India had their leading position in the world market. At the same time, British industries were lagging at the attack. To advance the position of British goods in the market, they forced heavy taxes on Indian industries. Heavy duties were imposed on the import of plain clothes. To put up with these expenses, industries had to raise the prices of the goods, where Britain goods were cheaper. As a result, Indian goods were misplaced from their lead in the market and British industries started to flourish. Later, the pattern of the company's commercial relations with India underwent a qualitative change. The Indian market and workers suffered, but the British gained out of it. Question number 3. Answer the following questions in brief. So, the first question is, why did the Indians fail in the struggle of 1857? On May 11, 1857, Indian sepoys revolted against the British in Meerut over the use of cartridges greased with pig and cow fat. The sepoys attacked the British magazine to arrest weapons stored there, but the sepoys could not withstand the British army. The reason were the British army was so well organized and strong. The military supplies of the sepoys were too limited. The sepoys were organized in the British sepoys were organized and the Indian sepoys were unorganized. Very weak leadership. Leaders like Nana Sahib, Tatya Tope, Rani Lakshmi Bai were not efficient enough to confront the British army. It was indirected, and not have any motive. It was just uprising from the religious and emotional wounds of sepoys. The second question is, write down the consequences of the struggle of 1857. The 1857 revolt failed and crushed by superior military forces of the British was a significant event of far-reaching consequences in the history of British rule in India. The results of 1857 revolt may be subdivided as constitutional changes. The British Crown gave up the policy of secondary isolation and advocated a policy of subordinate combination in respective of native states. The transfer of power from a trading company to the power of Britain by the Government of India Act 1858. The designation of the Governor General of India was changed of Viceroy. The administration machinery in India was centralized effectively due to the development of communications. Before the revolt of 1857, the army of the British in India was divided into major divisions. The weapon section was entirely kept under the British. There were more European soldiers in the army, and the expenditure on the army doubled up. India developed the growth of social distance between the Hindus and Muslims, which led to the communalization of social life and partition of India on communal lines. Thus, the revolt of 1857 had numerous consequences in the social life of Indians. The British took all the steps to avoid any other revolt in future. The rearrangements in all the fields of administration was a safety measure for it. The revolt made the British more challenging. What were the changes in the British policy after the struggle of 1857? The revolt of 1857 made changes in every field of life, and the Britishers determined to take necessary actions not to repeat such an uprising thereafter. British tried constantly to open new markets of Indian goods in Britain. Thereby, it improved the export of Indian manufacturers and thus encouraged their production. As a result of such excessive import duties and the development of machine industries, Indian exports to foreign countries fell rapidly. The British exported to Britain part of India's wealth and resources. India did not get any adequate economic return. This made an economic drain in India. By the end of 18th century, the drain formed nearly 9% of India's national income. There was change in the provision of India. There was transfer of power from trading company to the power of Britain. Then the designation was changed of the generals from general to the viceroy. There were policies for the army, the sepoys in the army. There were less Indians and more British soldiers.
Thank you, students. So now we will meet in our next session.